We are very fortunate now to be able to sort of turn to the Constitutional Convention itself with our lunchtime presenters, and certainly looking forward to the conversation with Vic Fisher, who you heard from briefly. But we're going to start with a presentation by Mike Schwaiger, who is are you chair of the Historians Committee of the Alaska Bar Association, talking about some of the papers from Tom Stewart, who became a judge but was also a delegate to the Alaska Constitution. So I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate everybody coming back from lunch. My presentation is going to be short. It's going to be pretty modest. I'm actually the stand-in for the person who was supposed to be here today, who actually discovered or rediscovered the materials that I'm going to... Louder? All right. I'm a stand-in for Tom Wagner today. He wanted to be here because he discovered some materials related to Tom Stewart and the Alaska Constitutional Convention, but he couldn't be here. He asked for someone on the Historians Committee to come, and that's me today. He's been working with Mary Alice McKean to locate these materials, any materials from Tom Stewart. He's pleased to announce, and I'm pleased to tell you in his place, that he's located two significant items. One is an article-length manuscript that's unpublished, and hopefully soon either published or selections from it will be published and made available to lawyers and scholars. The cover letter for the article-length manuscript is kind of funny. I mean, it's dated from 1992, and it talks about the article being on a floppy disk, which for you millennials is a way of storing data in a really inefficient way. Kind of looks like an LP, but a little smaller. And it was, of course, on WordPerfect 5.0. The other item is a book-length manuscript that's dated 2007, and I think that's the year that Tom Stewart passed away. I'm not sure how early before 2007 it was written, but the manuscript itself is dated that way. It looks like both of them have been edited, at least somewhat, by persons other than Tom Stewart. So I wanted to share with you just a couple of highlights from them. They're enjoyable, and I think that you'll enjoy getting to see some selections of them in the future, but here are some highlights to kind of whet your appetite about them. The manuscripts are interwoven personal, procedural, and political histories of the statehood movement and the Alaska Constitutional Convention. Tom Stewart gives thumbnail sketches of a lot of different people in these manuscripts. He talks about some prominent figures in Alaska and some national figures that I certainly didn't know figured into the statehood movement and the Constitutional Convention. So names that popped out were Adlai Stevenson, Joe McCarthy, Sam Rayburn, folks that I thought had no role whatsoever in the statehood movement or the convention. He also talks a lot about the consultants that he met with across the country and who traveled to Fairbanks to assist and advise the delegates as they discussed what should be or shouldn't be in the Constitution. He also gives a lot of thumbnail sketches about Alaska figures, the folks that we name high schools after. So Bartlett is in here, and Lathrop is in here, Diamond is in here. He talks a lot about his own role or his own roles, and there are many. He wears a lot of hats in the statehood movement and at the Constitutional Convention. He was an assistant attorney general. He was in the territorial legislature. He was an executive at the Alaska Statehood Commission. He was the secretary of the Constitutional Convention. And of course, that is all before he then later became a legislator in the state legislature, the director of the court system, and a Superior Court judge in Juneau. So he really did a lot for the territory in the early state. I think that what comes out of the manuscript is his most important role is this kind of intellectual odyssey that he undertakes at his own expense between jobs. And he describes it as a search for enlightenment to learn both from written sources and knowledgeable people how to approach the job of creating a first-class state constitution. How is the territorial legislature supposed to enact a law that calls for a constitutional convention? How are the delegates supposed to be elected? How are the delegates supposed to conduct themselves? Of course, he doesn't know how to do any of those things. And so he travels to Washington, Washington State, to Chicago, Illinois. He travels to Massachusetts, to Connecticut, to New York, to New Jersey, where they had recently held a constitutional convention. He goes to Colorado, and of course, like every good Alaskan, he goes to Hawaii. They had recently had a constitutional convention, and he wanted to get information about how that had gone. And it's another one of these moments that pops out, an aspect of technology from history. He has to fly to Hawaii in order to listen to the recordings of the Hawaii Constitutional Convention because they were captured on a magnetic wire that could not be duplicated. So people could travel there and listen to it, but they couldn't send the wire out anyplace else. There are a lot of procedural elements that he describes in great detail, and for some of it, it reads a little bit like inside baseball. You would really need to know a lot in order to understand it. But votes on legislative enactments that are relevant to the statehood movement, the election of the delegates, what happens at the convention in the committees and at the plenary sessions. What are the committee discussions, the significant ones, especially Article 8, Natural Resources, Article 10 on local government, and there is a big piece on style and drafting for anybody who's interested in that subject. The convention rules are described in detail. He talks a lot about the tension that the delegates felt in obtaining advice and incorporating advice from these consultants who were feared to be outside influences that might pollute the authorship of the Constitution by Alaskans, and the ways that the delegates attempted to incorporate that advice without sacrificing their own views. He answers questions like, how does an enabling act work? Why write a constitution before becoming a state? Why there are 55 delegates? Why the delegates had to sign 60 different copies of the Constitution? He talks about budgets. He talks about fundraising so that the plenary sessions can be recorded for posterity. Finally, he talks about the political history, and we've heard a little bit about the people who were left out, and he talks about why it is that the Constitutional Convention happens at this particular time with these particular people and for whom the Constitution is written. He doesn't go so far as to say that the terms of the Constitution are dictated by this historical context, but at least the process under which it was written certainly was. Alaskans were electing Democrats and Republicans at the time in the territory. Outside interests had a significant role, and there was a strong movement for home rule. There were real vacillations in Congress and within and between administrations of the president. He covers all of those, and some of those aspects are really predictable. I mean, you know that Republicans in Congress are going to want to bring in states that are going to reliably elect Republicans to Congress, so that they will increase their majority, and the Democrats had the same. So we see this tension of Congress looking to what the Alaska Territory, if it becomes a state, will do. Will they elect Republicans? Will they elect Democrats? And depending on who's in power, Alaska's statehood is favored or disfavored. But there's also some elements that appear kind of accidental or really unpredictable. And one highlight of the manuscript, a particularly funny one I thought, is about the timing of the convention and why this convention happened in 55 to 56. And he attributes this principally to what happened in the election in the territory in 1954, which was in turn a reaction to what happened in the legislature in 1953, which was that the incumbents in the legislature were so irresponsible that they were all going to be kicked out. And what I mean by so irresponsible, I mean they did not even formally adjourn the session because they were too drunk at the end of the session to do so. That's how bad. And so they all got tossed out, and the people who came in, their challengers, happened to be pro-statehood. It wasn't really a referendum on statehood, that 54 election, but it just happened to be that those people got kicked out and others came in. Who could have predicted that? So these are just a few of the highlights of these recently rediscovered materials. I know that Tom Wagner and Mary Alice McKean are going to be working with ALR and with perhaps with other publications to get selections to you. They're available in PDF format, and if anybody's interested, I can pass on Tom Wagner's contact information, and you can see if you can get a copy from him. Thank you.